The House in Oleander, based on true events in Bakersfield, California, as told by her niece. She was the kind of woman people remembered, strong, vibrant, and never one to scare easily. That's what made her story all the more chilling. Her name was Elise, and in the spring of 1978, she bought a modest Spanish-style bungalow on a quiet street in the Oleander neighborhood of Bakersfield, California. The home was charming. Stucco walls, arched doorways, and a wild orange tree in the backyard. It had been sitting on the market for nearly a year, which Elise found odd, but she chalked it up to the slow housing market. It had good bones, character, and plenty of light. Just the kind of place an artist like her could make into something special. The first few days were normal. She unpacked, played her favorite jazz records while painting the kitchen cabinets, and hung her bold, abstract artwork on the living room walls. She'd even hosted a small lunch in the backyard for a couple of friends who commented on the odd stillness of the house but thought little of it. But by the fourth morning, things started to change. She came down the hallway in her slippers, holding her coffee, only to find every single painting she had hung, now stacked neatly in a row against the baseboards, not fallen, not damaged, just removed, carefully, thoughtfully, as if someone was trying to say, "This doesn't belong here." She stood there in silence, her stomach slowly turning. She rehung the paintings, slightly annoyed, but telling herself it was just faulty nails, maybe vibrations from passing trucks, anything to make sense of it. But the next morning, they were back on the floor again. Only this time, the cupboard doors in the kitchen were wide open, and the dishes she had placed there were laid out one by one on the counter like a silent inventory. Each night, Elise heard shuffling in the hallway. Not footsteps, not rats. Something heavier, slower. She would freeze in bed, her breathing shallow, her hand gripping her blankets. She never worked up the nerve to go out and look. Something told her not to. Something told her that whatever was there didn't want to be seen. On the sixth night, she stopped turning off the hallway light, but it didn't help. At precisely 3:17 a.m., she heard a low creaking sound outside her bedroom door, followed by the unmistakable sound of breath, not hers, on the other side of the wood. That was the first night she cried. By the seventh morning, her resilience, once admired by everyone who knew her, was cracking. She hadn't slept, she barely ate, she didn't return phone calls. Her normally warm voice was flat, brittle. But still, she tried to push through. Until the eighth morning. She never told anyone what she saw. When her neighbor Marlene came outside to grab the newspaper, she saw Elise sprinting from her front door barefoot, keys in one hand and a trembling notebook in the other. She jumped into her car and peeled out of the driveway, her trunk still open, a white bedsheet caught in the breeze. She never returned, not to get her clothes, not her wallet, not even her art. The house was quietly listed a week later. A local agent handled it, said everything was in perfect condition, but gave vague answers when asked about the sudden listing. Elise moved out of town and eventually out of state. Those who knew her said she had changed. She stopped visiting friends. She stopped painting, became quiet and withdrawn, a shell of the woman she had been. She told her niece, during a hushed phone call, that she feared it would follow her if she spoke too much about what happened in that house. When her niece asked what she has seen that final morning, Elise simply replied, "It wasn't meant for me to see. I was warned." To this day, no one knows what Elise woke up to that morning. Some locals say the house is cursed, others claim it was never haunted at all, that Elise had a breakdown. But people who knew her before the move say that's impossible, that she wasn't the kind of woman to run. And yet, she did. The house in Oleander has been bought and sold many times but is currently unoccupied. The neighbors have stated that all of the new owners since Elise never stayed long. Lights flicker in the middle of the night. Strange music plays from inside when no one's home. And every few years, a fresh "for sale" sign appears out front, with no explanation, no story, just whispers. And Elise? She lives somewhere in Oregon now, alone, quiet. She no longer paints. and she never speaks about Bakersfield or what happened in Oleander.
The Watcher of 657 Boulevard, the true story of a suburban nightmare that still haunts Westfield, New Jersey. In the summer of 2014, a young family in search of peace and permanence found themselves standing before a towering colonial house nestled on the leafy streets of Westfield, New Jersey. It was stately, 6 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and just enough charm to call it a dream. They had no way of knowing the dream was already watching them. And it would never stop. Just 3 days after they closed on 657 Boulevard, Derek brought us stopped by the house alone after work. He was painting walls, prepping for the big move, when he stepped outside to check the mailbox. Inside, a white envelope, thick paper, no return address. It was handwritten, sloppily. The letter inside began simply, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." But the welcome was not kind. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Derek stared at the page, confused, then unnerved. The letter continued. Did you fill the house with the young blood I requested? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. Welcome, my friends. Welcome. Let the party begin. He stood there for a long time, letter trembling in his hands. There was no name, just a chilling signature scrawled at the bottom. The Watcher. The family contacted the police immediately. They were advised not to tell anyone, not even neighbors. But it was already too late. Another letter arrived just weeks later. And this time, the Watcher knew things he shouldn't. I see you have already flooded 657 with contractors. The house is crying from all the noise. I am pleased to know your children's names now. I saw them painting in the sunroom. The one in the green jacket. She is the artist, yes? He mentioned the children's birth order, nicknames, and even commented on interior work that could only be seen from a narrow rear window or from inside the house. The Broadduses stopped going to the home during renovations. They launched their own investigation, installing security cameras, hiring ex-FBI agents, and even speaking to a priest to bless the house. But the letters kept coming. Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you. The police questioned one neighbor in particular, Michael Langford, who lived next door. He was odd, quiet, and his family had lived in the area for generations. But DNA on the envelope didn't match him, and he denied everything. Eventually, suspicion turned inward. Some questioned whether Derek and Maria wrote the letters themselves, a twisted hoax, a resale scam, but their DNA didn't match either. The terror was real. 3 years later, the Watcher returned again, but this time to another family. When the Broadduses briefly rented the house to tenants, a new envelope arrived. You wonder who the Watcher is? Turn around, idiots. Maybe you even spoke to me, one of the so-called neighbors. Or maybe you do know and are too scared to tell anyone. I am in charge. The house had become a prison that no one lived in, a monument to fear. In 2019, 5 years after the first letter, the Broadduses sold the home at a $400,000 loss. They never slept a single night inside 657 Boulevard. They were too fearful for their children's safety. And to this day, the Watcher has never been caught. The identity, the motive, the obsession, still unknown. Only one thing is certain. Someone is still watching.
The Boy in the Walls. In one of the most chilling and widely publicized true horror stories, Daniel LaPlante terrorized the Bowen family in Pepperell, Massachusetts in 1986. The Bowens hadn't lived there long when it started, with creaks in the floorboards. Tina Bowen, a teenager growing up in the quiet town of Pepperell, Massachusetts, first noticed strange occurrences shortly after she and her family moved into their new home and meeting a boy named Daniel LaPlante. He had called the house one day, seemingly by chance, saying he got her number from a mutual friend at school. He was awkward but persistent, and eventually, Tina agreed to go on a date. She found him strange. His energy didn't sit right with her. He was morbid and obsessed with death. During their date, he asked uncomfortable questions about the recent passing of her mother. She never called him back. He gave her the creeps. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. After that night, the Bowen family began experiencing things they couldn't explain. Objects in the house would go missing and reappear in odd places. Silverware shifted in drawers, furniture moved slightly overnight, the television turned on by itself. And always, sounds. Small ones at first. Scratching, soft knocking, creaks and footsteps in the walls. Frank Bowen, a single father raising Tina and her younger sister, assumed the house was settling or that the girls were imagining things, but Tina swore she felt eyes on her when she was alone in her room. The air in the house felt heavy with something unseen, something watching. One night, it all came to a terrifying head. Tina was brushing her hair in front of the mirror when she saw something move behind her. When she turned, nothing was there, just her bedroom. But something was off. Her things had been rearranged. Later that night, her father Frank heard a loud crash from upstairs. Rushing to Tina's room, he found her door wide open, and in the hallway stood Daniel LaPlante. His face was smeared with ketchup and mayonnaise like war paint. In one hand he held a hatchet, in the other a wrench. He said nothing, just stood there, breathing hard, his eyes were wild. Frank lunged. Tina screamed and jumped from the second-story window to flee and get help. She ran barefoot through the neighborhood in the dark to call the police. When they arrived, the house was empty. Daniel had vanished. What police found next stunned even the most seasoned officers. Inside the walls of the Bowen home, behind a built-in cupboard, they found a narrow crawl space, and within it, signs of human habitation, bedding, food wrappers, a small stash of Tina's belongings. Tunnels connected various parts of the home, allowing LaPlante to move between rooms undetected. He had been living in the walls of their house for weeks, if not months, possibly since they had moved in. He had been watching them, listening, moving around the house when they were gone, or asleep. The media erupted in horror. But the nightmare wasn't over. After his arrest, LaPlante was released on bail. A mistake that would cost innocent lives. Not long after, in the nearby town of Townsend, he broke into the home of a young pregnant woman, Priscilla Gustafson. There he committed one of the most gruesome crimes in Massachusetts history. He assaulted and murdered Priscilla, then drowned her 2 young children aged 7 and 5 in separate bathtubs. The horror of it shattered the region. Daniel LaPlante was caught and sentenced to multiple life terms in prison, where he remains to this day. As for the Bowen family, they never truly recovered. The trauma of knowing someone had lived among them, unseen, listening from inside the walls, watching them dress, sleep, eat, left deep psychological scars. The house was sold. Frank struggled with the guilt of not knowing. Tina moved far away, and never again spoke publicly about what had happened.
Secret Book Club.